Our series of interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. Once you hear from our next guest, I'm sure that you will agree that he deserves the moniker of interesting person. Saving America welcomes Ilya Shapiro, who is a senior fellow and director of constitutional studies at the Manhattan Institute and a contributing editor of City Journal. Previously, he was an executive director and senior lecturer at Georgetown Center for Constitution, and before that, vice president of the Cato Institute. Shapiro is the author of Lawless, The Miseducation of America's Elite, and Supreme Disorder, Judicial Nominations and the Politics of America's Highest Court. And he's the co-author of Religious Liberties for Corporations. He's been published in many leading publications and writes the Shapiro's Gavel newsletter on Substack. Shapiro has testified many times before Congress and state legislatures and has filed more than 500 friend of the court briefs in the Supreme Court. He's got a bachelor's from Princeton, a master's from the London School of Economics, and a law degree from the University of Chicago. He is joining us to discuss the decline of some of America's most famous universities. We welcome Ilya Shapiro for his first appearance on Saving America.
Well, great to be with you, David. Thanks for having me. And yes, I try to be friendly to courts and lots of other people besides.
Sounds like a winner. Well, we encourage here on Saving America people to be friendly to each other, and it's one of my platforms in life is to get people to talk to each other and cooperate with each other. And you've delved into an area that's been a great interest. Where we both did our bachelor's degree at Ivy League schools. They're only about 40 miles apart, and I was there, I think, a bit earlier than you were, but at the time I could see these schools heading into this, what we currently call, just for simple terms, the woke decline that seems to be taking over a lot of America's higher education institutes, at least the fancy ones. So what's the current status of many of the leading law schools in the United States in terms of understanding constitutional structure and protections? Does this situation include the reaction at Georgetown Law School to one of your tweets?
Yeah, well, David, I'm going to start by pushing back on a little of your framing, because I don't think that what you saw when you were a student or a young alum or in the decades since is really what I'm getting at, in the sense that we've had a long time, more than half a century, of kind of liberal faculty bias and other such things. But what we have now in the last 10, 12 years is the illiberal takeover of higher education. Now, there are illiberal things that happen in society from lots of ideological directions, but in higher education, which is captured by the left, that is left-wing illiberalism, and that means an intolerance to opposing views and opposition to the basic classical liberal values of higher education, free speech, academic freedom, equal protection of the laws. All of these things are anathema to a postmodern theory that holds that power imbalances are baked into structures and institutions, and so all of those structures and institutions need to be torn down and rebuilt or reconfigured according to a different privilege hierarchy or intersectional matrix. All of that kind of philosophical mumbo jumbo, and that's particularly dangerous in law schools because, after all, they graduate the next generation of the gatekeepers of our legal and political institutions. Much as it's sad if a sociology or an English department goes off the rails, the consequences for society are much more dire with law schools or medical schools, where there also are these dangerous trends, where that's literally an issue of life and death. And I trace that illiberal takeover, again, something that's much more recent and different than kind of the decades-long conservative complaint about the hippies taking over the faculty lounge. Indeed, those hippies, the Berkeley free speech movement, would now be considered retrograde white supremacists by today's radicals. and they've been aided and abetted by university leaders. And so there have been failures of ideology, which everybody likes to talk about, critical legal studies, critical theory, etc. We can get into that. But even more importantly, failures of bureaucracy and failures of leadership. And a lot of this, it's not, doesn't put in for sound bites as much, but understanding these undercurrents, these structural changes that have happened is very important for understanding the direction, the crisis in higher education, and my focus on legal education.
Well, it is a major challenge, and yes, I agree with you that it was a different type of wokeness that I experienced. I saw that slide starting, but I don't know that any of us anticipated that it would get as bad as it has gotten. And for the law schools, how did they get to this point? I mean, it's almost anti-law to see some of the approaches they're taking today.
Right. So, law schools have had a left-wing bias for a while. I mean, for a long time, in classes of constitutional law, there wouldn't even be the Constitution in the case books, and then it kind of made it into an appendix, and eventually started to make its way where students would actually read it. That harkens to a broader revolution in the law with originalism and textualism and Justice Scalia and all of these other developments. But law schools, the problem is, to be a good lawyer, you have to understand every perspective on a given issue to represent your client's interests, whether it be in the courtroom, in the boardroom, at the negotiating table, wherever lawyers appear. You have to see what the other side's perspective might be to be able to better counter it. Well, if half or more of those perspectives are considered anathema, that you're not allowed, they're outside the Overton window, the permissible range of expressed policy views, you're not going to be a very good lawyer. If half the federal judiciary is going to be appointed by Republicans, and that is increasingly or entirely originalists at this point, to not have faculty on your at your school that can teach originalism, forget actually believing in it, but being able to convey it as a mode of interpretation and advocacy for your students. If you don't have that, and most schools don't, then you're doing your students a disservice just in terms of their being able to advocate in the courts. And so you've had this vicious cycle. Part of this is generational, with millennials that are more activist replacing the baby boomer generation that are kind of more traditional ACLU type liberals. And you see this shift from education to activism or indoctrination. And as I mentioned, the bureaucracy, there's just been an explosion of non-teaching staff that are even more biased and aren't steeped in norms of academic freedom or the search for the truth or what have you, to the point where, especially in elite places, there are many times more bureaucrats, non-teaching staff than professors, and even multiples of the number of students at places like Stanford or Yale. So the joke is, 100 years ago, Yaleys came to campus with their own personal butler, and maybe now we're trying to provide that same level of service with these educational bureaucrats. And it's not just the DEI offices, I should add, David. We can get into DEI, but admissions offices, student services, the importation of behavioral psychology, this safetyism, the idea of harm, an idea that is uncomfortable to you, that might offend you or you've never encountered before, makes you uncomfortable and therefore can't be taught. These importation of these theories from other disciplines has really harmed legal education.
Yeah, and of course, I think the public is starting to pay attention when they see some of these law graduates who've become judges who are releasing hardened criminals with probation after somebody's killed somebody, and we're sitting back here saying this guy's on the street, or this guy got 5 years instead of life in prison. So I think it's starting to catch the public's attention in some different areas, particularly with regard to, I think, the what's happening in criminal law. How do we fix this problem? How do we get back to having great American law schools? And I think we're seeing a reaction in the judiciary, because I've heard that the federal judiciary up in your neighborhood up in New York and Washington have said they will not hire current Yale Law School graduates. I don't know how broadly that rule is, but it caught my attention, since Yale historically had been ranked one of the top law schools in the country. And I've heard that have been unseated from that position in the latest polls.
Well, I mean, the U.S. News rankings don't mean that much if it's just a matter of, one or two spots here and there. You got to
Yeah.
take that with a grain of salt. But yeah, Yale, along with Stanford, have long been thought of as among the very, very best, most prestigious at least. And over a dozen judges are boycotting those two schools in particular for clerkship hiring because of their um, unhealthy climate or attitude or policy with respect to the freedom of speech. Another 20 or so judges are boycotting Columbia because of anti-Semitism and related issues. So, yeah, that's one of the tools in the tool chest. In my book, Lawless, I write about, at the end, what can be done, what should be done to counter this. Some institutions might not be salvageable and they'll decline. The whether you're thinking about the rankings or kind of the prestige or the reputations of schools, they're not static over time. They can change. But in general, it'll take external actors, exogenous shocks, as some economists would put it, and that includes action by state legislatures in the case of public schools, investigations, hearings by the federal government. We've seen hearings of university presidents in the House Education Committee that have been very effective, for example. And now the executive branch, the Justice Department Civil Rights Section, the Department of Education, that are investigating and levying fines and putting into receivership certain schools and programs. All of that is to the good, and employers deciding that we're just not going to hire people who yell at federal judges, "We hope your daughters are raped," or who support Hamas or other terrorist organizations. So, I think it'll. I'm for all of the above in terms of trying alternative solutions, whether with respect to higher education broadly or legal education specifically.
Well, you've hit an acronym, and I actually talk about it in some of my classes, is DEI. And of course, Trump personally has come out heavily against it, and tried to get the Department of Education to defund schools that still practice that. And I know here in Texas and our closest competing state over in Florida, have both the governors of both states have said that their official policy is that state universities in those two states cannot have DEI. And of course, we've seen different academics trying to work around that and create different misnomers for their DEI approach. But why was DEI so bad in the first place? What did it do to our educational system, and especially our law schools?
Yeah, I go into this, well, in my book, but also I have an article in Sapir, Sapir, which is a journal of Jewish ideas, I guess they call themselves. I have an article called The Diversity Industrial Complex. And I explain how the words diversity, equity, inclusion, the concepts, their dictionary definitions, there's nothing wrong with them. In fact, they're healthy. You want to have a diversity of ideas that prevents groupthink. It makes for richer discussions, better decision making. Equity in the legal context is a centuries old Anglo-American legal concept that simply means treating people fairly, very understandable, equitably. Inclusion, you want people to feel comfortable and welcome where they're working or studying or what have you. Obviously, good, uncontroversial things. The problem is, as practiced by the professionals, by DEI officers. And there are so many of them that there's actually an industry group called the National Association of Higher Education Diversity Officers, tens of thousands of people. The way that it's practiced is in quite literally an Orwellian sense, the opposite of what I've just defined. So it goes against diversity of thought. It opposes equality of opportunity in favor of equality of result, and it excludes anybody who might have an opposing view. And so, as practiced and as developed, this DEI theory is about people all thinking the same way in a very radical, progressive way. You know, some people call it woke or whatever. But the point is, I was alluding to these postmodern theories of power imbalances that are reflected in institutions, which then need to be torn down and reconfigured, that you have to check your privilege, as it were, and where your rights and freedoms depend on which groups you're part of and whether they're deemed an oppressor or oppressed. All of these sorts of things that are not healthy, especially in the realm of higher education, where you're supposed to be searching for truth, creating knowledge, conveying knowledge to the next generation. Regardless of where that might lead, it goes against intellectual freedom. And so, as these DEI systems have been put in place, it prevents certain kind of pedagogy, prevents certain kind of teaching. It affects who's admitted, and the admissions office looks for activists rather than people who might want to become a prosecutor or work on antitrust to create lower prices for consumers, or other reasons that people might go to law school for. And it really changes the nature, not just of law schools, but eventually of the legal profession.
Well, it is an interesting pathway, and like I said, in my first book, one of the conclusions I draw is that one of the reasons America is so great is due to the diversity of our population, and I'm unequivocally an advocate of true diversity, where we bring all sorts of people together and we give all of them an opportunity to express what they think and how they came to it, and it's created this incredible outcome here for the United States. And it's kind of interesting that people who are practicing this DEI stuff have lost track of where this how we got to the success that we have. It's interesting. I have 2 degrees from the University of Virginia, which is not one of the Ivies, but is one of the most highly ranked private public schools. And it's interesting because I was so offended about. I'm a college professor here in Houston at a little Catholic college. At the University of Virginia, they were paying their DEI director, this is around 2020, 2021, over $400,000 a year. And Jim Ryan was the president. And it's kind of interesting because I have been contacted by a group called the Jefferson Group. And they clearly were a little unhappy with the direction that UVA was going in, and began to organize the alumni to say, hey, this is not Jeffersonian thought. This is really off track. And it's interesting, as I think the DEI person is gone, but it was interesting because Jim Ryan, about 6 months ago, resigned 1 year ahead of his planned retirement. And he alluded to what was going on in terms of the alumni coming back up at him and saying, you're taking this wonderful, highly ranked university in the wrong direction. So it's kind of interesting because he was in for about 10 years. So I'm hoping we're going to see some of that in some of these other institutions.
An inordinate number of these DEI offices and officers were formed in the last decade. And that's when things have really exploded. Now, things might be different now because of President Trump's executive orders and the enforcement by the Justice Department and others, although in some places They've taken down websites and changed titles, but nothing's really changed, and so it'll take a while and continued foot on the gas to counteract it. But as of 2021, a survey of 65 large universities, the old Power Five football conferences, now it's all reconfigured, but anyway, representing about 16% of students at four-year schools in the country, found that the average college had more than 45 people devoted to DEI, more than the average number of history professors. At Michigan, 261 people had full-time authority over DEI, double that if you include part-time responsibilities, at a cost of more than $30 million a year. Now think about, spending that money if you care about helping people from underprivileged backgrounds, say, on tutoring, on scholarships, who knows what. But instead, it was the fastest growing segment of the educational bureaucracy, with staffs on average 4 times larger than those that provide legally required accommodations to students with disabilities. And this is the irony, or the bitter, the sardony, you could say, of all of this. These offices fail on their own terms. Campus climate surveys show that student satisfaction generally, comfort with diversity specifically, inversely correlates with the size and budgets of DEI offices. So this has just been just a terrible development for academia and for American society.
Well, I'm certainly hoping that that's going to change, and I hope people will see your book and take some lessons from that. And as you know, we keep these interviews short so people actually listen to them and benefit from what you're sharing with them. How can our audience get more information about you and your book, Lawless, The Miseducation of America's Elite?
Well, sure. You can read all about me and keep up with my writings and amicus briefs and all the rest at my page at the Manhattan Institute, which is just manhattan.institute. You can follow me on X, formerly Twitter, at iShapiro. And on Substack, as you mentioned, David, I have a newsletter, Shapiro's Gavel. And then you can buy my books, whether at Amazon or any other place where fine and not so fine books are sold.
Sounds like a winner. It's been great visiting with you. This is Dr. David D. Schein for Saving America. Thanks for joining us, and be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube at Dr. Dave Saves America.